Over the course of the last century, our planet has become warmer, but in particular over the last 50 years. It is now recognized that human activities are largely responsible for this warming. In particular, the burning of fossil fuels has released huge quantities of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, which trap additional heat in the lower atmosphere. The impact of this is being seen worldwide as glaciers melt, sea levels rise, and there are more desert areas. The African continent is particularly exposed and vulnerable to the negative effects of global warming. Therefore, the African Union and the European Union have started to work together in the three key research areas affected by climate change: water, agriculture, and health. The result of this decision was a call for project proposals, the FP7 Africa Call, out of which several collaborative research projects were funded to help people coping with climate change.
Sometimes, over the time, in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, the climate has changed a great deal. There are times when it is very hot, you can see some rain coming, you wonder where it has gone. There are times when it doesn't even rain at all. And most of the people in such cases here, they rely on relief food from the government, from donors. Well, it is very difficult because we have just only one permanent river around at Kiboko, which is supplying water to this area. Recently, you could see people with bicycles and jerrycans going to fetch water there.
Kumwagilia mashamba, tunamwagilia sasa mashamba mengi kuzidi pale mwanzoni, na wanyama sasa hivi hawahangaiki kwenda mtoni kunywa maji. Maji haya yanafika kwenye kibwawa chao pale, na ng'ombe zinakunywa vizuri. Tunapata maji ya kutosha kwenye kupiga matofali, kuotesha bustani. Hospitalini maji yanapatikana sasa, hatuchoti maji kupeleka kwa kichwa mpaka hospitali, alafu na mashuleni watoto wanatumia. Kwa hiyo inatusaidia sana kwa matumizi pia jumla ya nyumbani.
Wherever we are reliant on water. We simply can't live without it. As temperatures rise, rainfall patterns become less predictable, and the threat of both floods and droughts increases. EU-funded research into drought forewarning systems, water resource management, and appropriate technologies is part of an ongoing work to help people adapt to a changing climate.
Africa depends almost 90% on water-related activities, and any changes in the water supplies affects the people directly and the country as a whole. So we have impacts which cross all over the spectrum of communities in terms of poverty and food security. We also have issues of conflict, climate change-driven conflicts, which climate change affects the water supply, and then the water supply, if it goes down, people start to fight over it. So we have very serious impacts which run, and also you have issues of droughts, the frequency of which is becoming much more frequent. Water is important both for Africa and for Europe, because water is life.
Cooperation with Africa has been the object of a specific call for proposals. That is, we call it the Africa Call. And we have actually done that to ensure that this climate change challenge is studied with other continents. Water management per se is a very complex issue, and it involves, in fact, citizens of all ages, from international to local levels. And at a national scale, the principles of integrated water resource management have been adopted by the United Nations and are actually followed up worldwide. And all these management principles require a lot of scientific knowledge. Climate change represents an additional pressure on water demand, water resources, ecosystem, and so on. And we need to take care about this pressure, which is exacerbating existing pressures. The fourth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change has highlighted that climate change is likely to affect water resources. And in particular, for example, they have stressed that dry area may become drier, wet area may become wetter. It means that all action programs taken to manage the water will have to include also adaptation measures. So the seventh framework program for research has given a high priority on studies on climate change impact on the water cycle. There is a very wide range of projects that have been funded during the years 2002-2007 and thereafter in 2013, and it helped in fact to frame possible options related to water policies that might be open to adaptation measures.
The first step to evaluating climate change patterns is, in fact, monitoring and predicting future patterns. Better forecasting enables scientists to develop better equipment and coping strategies. The DEW4A project is focused on developing drought forecasting systems to minimize the impact on local communities.
We are basically looking at the vulnerability of the Greater Horn of Africa to droughts. We are doing this mainly through analysis of data, which is collected from meteorological stations and socio-economic data put together in one place, and then looking at the vulnerabilities of the communities within the Greater Horn of Africa.
The DEW4A project is focusing on improving drought forecasting and warning, and the idea of forecasting warning is actually quite simple. Is if we can provide information of let's say the expectation of the weather, if it's too dry or too wet, also in the coming 3 to 6 months, then users on the ground, for example farmers, can maybe take measures to reduce the impact of extreme weather, for example of extreme drought.
Building resilience against drought requires as one of the strategies in early warning system.
So within the project, we're looking at, on the one hand, the vulnerability of different groups. So how do we prioritize different user groups? And also, how do we work with institutions to translate the message from the forecast to the warning?
The entire world is experiencing an increased demand on water resources and reduced water availability. This is mainly due to changes in land usage, particularly in Africa, where there is more human activity due to population growth, economic development, and increased agriculture. My Water is a very special project where they are developing strategies to cope with the water issues in Africa.
What we are trying to do is to put all of these data sources working together into a unique interface software platform, which is highly accessible and flexible, to output almost automatic service chains, to providing user-tailored results to users in different water-related activities, namely water for irrigation, namely water for consumption, for energy production, even for flood preparedness. So with all of this together, providing information about all of the water-related variables, we will be able not only to have more accurate and uncertain results, as we will also be able to provide forecasts and simulation capabilities which are so necessary.
Through greater access to information, it is hoped that access to water itself can be improved. Research is also being carried out in other areas of water resource management. AfroMaison is a multi-partner project which brings together different expertise to help find sustainable solutions.
The key aspect of AfroMaison is really in developing strategies to deal, for example, with climate change in the context of natural resource management, which means that in a stakeholder-driven process, we try to to look at the risks, and then in the next step at developing strategies to deal with those risks or to deal with consequences of climate change and other societal changes in the areas where we work with.
Ethiopia is actually one of the largest population in Africa, and then it's also an agriculture-based economy. And in agriculture-based economy, both land and water are really very much important. Although Ethiopia has a large land resource and large water resource, we haven't used really efficiently and effectively those resources. There is really a need actually to work on water and water-related resources to improve efficiency, to improve this productivity, and then to address actually issue of poverty and economic development. So UMI is contributing towards that goal.
There's a lot of indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge that is often as important as the scientific knowledge.
Climate change has an impact on water resources as much in Europe as it does in Africa. Some of the partnership research projects work in both continents. CLIME works in the Mediterranean region.
CLIME is taking the approach of looking at small-scale watersheds in the Mediterranean region. So we're not covering nationwide assessments, but we're focusing on dedicated watersheds, dedicated case studies in which we can experience climate change impact. And the first necessity in order to get started and to initiate such a project is to find and identify a good partner, which we gladly did in our cases, in the Tunisian site and in the Egyptian site, in the Nile Delta in particular, where we are setting up and building with their help a local network of stakeholders, a local network of scientists, and we try to collaborate together, first to collect information that is crucial for the project, but second also to have communication partners to explain our findings and to make sure that these findings propagate and disseminate into the Egyptian and Tunisian public.
I work with CLIME Group as a principal investigator for global climatic change and its effect on the Nile Delta of Egypt. Global climatic change is a fact. Rising of the sea level is a fact. Seawater intrusion is a fact. We measured it, and we just start to have many problems for that in Nile Delta. CLIME is helping me how to manage groundwater abstractions from the ground, not to encourage the seawater intrusions to come to us.
By using the appropriate technology, people have the right tools to adapt to climate change. WashTech tools help the stakeholders to validate water and sanitation technologies to fit in the specific context of application and identify obstacles towards sustainable water services.
A WashTech is an action research project, as we call it. So it's very much based on the ground, and we are working with partners that are directly involved in the real situation. And that means local government, NGOs, manufacturers, so the private sector, but also hand pump mechanics, and with users. So we involve them to get the real picture how issues around technology and particularly the sustainability of service, but technology plays a very important role in sustainability of water and sanitation service.
All technologies do not work everywhere. You have to study the context under which you want to introduce it and make sure that the conditions on the ground are right to make the technology work optimally. A technology applicability framework, the TAF, is a framework that's supposed to help everyone who is involved in the provision of wash services to assess how applicable that technology being introduced is to the context in which it's being introduced.
The challenges that are ahead for drought forecasting and monitoring is basically data. We don't have enough data. The methods of forecasting droughts have not been properly done, so there's also a challenge there. And then lastly, the socio-economic aspects of drought. We have poverty issues within the African communities that would really interfere with coping with droughts, whether we forecast it or not.
What we see in Africa is a large variety of climates, and also there's actually quite a lot of water resources in Africa, even though often you see pictures of a dry continent, but there is in fact sufficient water, but it's the distribution of water that is the problem, not only geographical distribution but also in time. So sometimes we have too much water and sometimes we have too little water. So providing information such through forecasting is trying to help us cope with the variability of the climates.
Climate change is a fact. We cannot go around that. And we see that in terms of water, there are many effects, and the effects are related to the water accessibility, availability, the water quantity and the water quality.
Water is life. It is a precondition for human, animal and plant life, as well as an indispensable resource for the economy. Water also plays a fundamental role in the climate regulation cycle. Water scarcity and drought is an increasingly frequent and widespread phenomenon in Europe and in Africa. Successful adaptation to the impacts of climate change on water is key to ensure a future for all.